Welcome to Nocturnal Tales. Tonight we travel to Cairo in the spring of 1937, when the evenings are scented with dust, jasmine and intrigue. The white palaces gleam beneath scarlet fezzes, and young men in the cafés no longer lower their voices when the king's name is mentioned. The Last King of Cairo begins with a letter from the British Residency. A document has vanished from a locked dispatch box in the palace offices. A list of army officers who meet in secret and call themselves patriots. A celebrated detective and his companion arrive at the Khedive Automobile Club on the night King Farid himself is expected. And within hours, a midnight rendezvous on the eastern terrace ends not with proof, but with a jeweled dagger and 5 words pinned to a dead man's breast. The king has 24 hours. This is a story about what power does when it has been inherited rather than earned. About a young king magnificent enough to dazzle a room and foolish enough to lose a country. A singer whose beauty enters a room ahead of her. A prince whose tired elegance hides something colder than boredom. And officers who have stored their humiliation carefully and are ready to spend it. It is about locked dispatch boxes. A midnight meeting that ends in blood instead of proof. And the oldest question revolutions ever ask, whether what comes after will be better than what came before. As always, this tale is inspired by the spirit of the great Golden Age crime writers, but the plot, characters and text you're about to hear are entirely our own creation. Though the historical epilogue at the end draws on the real and dramatic fall of King Farouk and the Egyptian Revolution of 1952. To listen to this entire mystery ad-free and to unlock next week's case early, join our inner circle on Patreon for just $2.99 a month. The direct link is the very first one in the description below. Now settle in as the motor car turns toward the automobile club. The electric fans turn lazily above leather chairs, and from the salon comes a burst of laughter, a woman's laugh, clear and musical. While outside the open windows, Cairo murmurs in the darkness like a crowd before a locked gate. Chapter 1. 24 hours before dawn. It began, as many disasters do, with champagne, uniforms, and a very beautiful woman laughing too loudly. Poirot and I had come to Cairo in the spring of 1937, when the evenings were scented with dust, jasmine, petrol, and intrigue. Egypt outwardly was all ceremony. White palaces, scarlet fezzes, polished motor cars, officers in dress uniform, ministers with decorations enough to sink them in the Nile. But beneath that glitter lay something restless. One felt it in the streets. The young men in the cafés no longer lowered their voices when the king's name was mentioned. The officers did not salute quite so quickly. The newspapers, censored though they were, had developed that peculiar habit of saying nothing so plainly that everyone knew exactly what was meant. "Cairo," I said to Poirot, as our motor car turned toward the Khedive Automobile Club, "is in a strange humour." Poirot adjusted his white gloves. "But of course, Hastings. A country is like a room in which there has been a quarrel. Even when everyone smiles, the chairs remember." The reason for our presence in Egypt was delicate. Sir Miles Carmichael, attached to the British Residency, had written to Poirot requesting his assistance in a matter which, he insisted, was not political. That naturally meant that it was entirely political. A document had disappeared from a locked dispatch box in the palace offices. Sir Miles would not say more in writing, but the courier who brought the letter had been sufficiently pale to suggest that the missing paper was not a dinner menu. We met Sir Miles that evening at the Automobile Club, where King Farid himself was expected after dinner. Farid was young, handsome in a heavy, indolent fashion, with large dark eyes, soft hands, and a mouth already trained to command before it had learned restraint. One saw at once why foolish people loved him, and sensible people feared for the kingdom. The club was one of those institutions which believed civilization to consist of leather chairs, cold drinks, and the exclusion of anyone who actually made civilization possible. Electric fans turned lazily above our heads, Servants moved silently. At the far end of the salon, officers and courtiers gathered in bright clusters beneath portraits of dead rulers who, I thought, looked more competent by virtue of being deceased. Sir Miles came forward, thin, sunburnt, and worried. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank God." "My friend," said Poirot, "when an Englishman thanks God before he has had a whisky, the affair is grave." Sir Miles did not smile. "It is worse than grave. It may be fatal." He led us into a small reading room screened from the salon by carved wooden panels. A man stood inside, twisting a cigarette between nervous fingers. He was stout, expensively dressed, and possessed of that shiny, perspiring face which always makes me suspect either rich food or a bad conscience. "This is Nabil Pasha," said Sir Miles, "controller of the royal household." Nabil Pasha bowed with the stiffness of a man who considered foreigners necessary but regrettable. "I must speak plainly," he said. "His Majesty is surrounded by traitors." Poirot sat. I remained standing by the mantelpiece. "That is often the complaint of kings," Poirot observed. "It is sometimes even true." Nabil Pasha shot him a sharp look. A list was taken from my dispatch box. Names, army names, men who meet in secret. They call themselves patriots. Sir Miles said quietly, "Young officers, nationalists, angry over corruption in the War Ministry, British influence, palace extravagance, the usual tinder." "And the match?" asked Poirot. Nabil Pasha swallowed. "The match is tomorrow night." I confess I stared. "Tomorrow?" "So it is believed," said Sir Miles. "If the king arrests them at once, there may still be time. If he hesitates—" He did not finish. From the salon came a burst of laughter. A woman's laugh, clear and musical, followed by the deeper amusement of men who wished to be seen laughing with her. Poirot turned his head slightly. "Who is that?" Sir Miles looked irritated. "Madame Samira Voss, a singer. Half the court is infatuated with her. The other half pretends not to be." Nabil Pasha's face tightened. "She is dangerous." "Because she sings?" I asked. "Because men talk when they wish to impress a beautiful woman." Before I could reply, the door opened, and the lady herself appeared. I had seen beauty before, but Samira Voss had the kind that entered a room ahead of her. She wore silver, cut with Parisian daring and Egyptian richness, and her black hair was smooth as lacquer beneath a diamond clip. Her eyes moved over Sir Miles, rested on Nabil Pasha with faint amusement, and came at last to Poirot. "So this is the little Belgian detective," she said. Poirot rose and bowed. "Madame, already I perceive that Cairo is well informed." "Cairo is always informed. It is merely seldom honest." She held out a folded paper. "Nabil, you dropped this in the salon." The controller snatched it from her hand too quickly. Poirot's eyes flickered. "A receipt?" he asked gently. Nabil Pasha forced a smile. "A private matter." Samira's smile did not move. "In Cairo, Pasha, there are no private matters, only public ones waiting for the right balcony." She left us with a little inclination of the head. Sir Miles muttered something unprintable under his breath. Poirot looked at Nabil Pasha. "You were saying, monsieur, that the list of officers has vanished." "Yes." "From a locked box?" "Yes." "Who had access?" "Myself. His Majesty's private secretary, Colonel Rashid of military intelligence, and Prince Kamal, the king's cousin." "A charming selection," murmured Poirot. "The servant, the soldier, the prince, and yourself." Nabil Pasha flushed. "I am loyal." "Loyalty," said Poirot, "is a word with many pockets." At that moment a sudden hush fell over the salon outside. We turned. Through the carved screen I saw him enter. King Farid of Egypt, surrounded by aides, officers, cousins, flatterers, and enemies disguised as all four. He wore evening dress beneath a sash of pale green silk. A diamond order glittered on his breast. He looked magnificent, spoiled, bored, and utterly unaware that history had already begun to move against him. The king crossed the room, accepted a glass, kissed Madame Samira's hand, and laughed at something whispered by a young cavalry captain standing nearby. Nabil Pasha gripped Poirot's sleeve. That man, Captain Hassan el-Masri, one of them. Poirot's gaze rested upon the young officer. He was lean, composed, with the hard, hungry face of a man who has known humiliation and stored it carefully. "And he knows," said Nabil Pasha, "that I know." There was no mistaking the fear in his voice. Poirot observed him for a long moment. "You have not told me everything." The controller's lips trembled. "I will. Tonight. After the king leaves. Not here. Not before all these ears." "You delay," said Poirot. "That is unwise." "I have survived in palaces for 20 years, Monsieur Poirot. A man survives by choosing the moment." He looked toward the glittering salon. "Midnight. Come to the eastern terrace. I shall bring proof." Poirot's face hardened. "No, monsieur. You will bring it now." But Nabil Pasha had already drawn back, smoothing his coat, recovering his public smile. "Midnight," he repeated. He went out into the salon and was immediately swallowed by uniforms and cigarette smoke. I glanced at Poirot. "You think he is in danger?" Poirot did not answer at once. At the far end of the room, King Farid raised his glass. The courtiers applauded. Beyond the open windows, Cairo murmured in the darkness like a crowd before a locked gate. At last Poirot said softly, "Hastings, there are moments when murder is not the crime. It is only the bell that announces a larger catastrophe." At midnight, beneath a moon white as bone, we found Nabil Pasha on the eastern terrace. He was seated upright in a cane chair facing the Nile. For one absurd second, I thought he was asleep. Then I saw the dark stain spreading across the front of his white waistcoat, and the folded paper pinned neatly to his breast with a jeweled dagger. Poirot bent over him. The paper bore only 5 words, written in French. "The king has 24 hours." Poirot's face was very still. "No, Hastings," he said. "Less than that." Chapter 2. The Dead Man on the Terrace. I have seen death in many settings, but never one quite so theatrical as that eastern terrace above the Nile. The moonlight lay upon the marble like spilled milk. Beyond the balustrade, the river moved black and silent, broken here and there by the lamps of late boats. From inside the club came music, laughter, and the clink of glasses. It seemed obscene that men should be discussing horses, politics, and women, while Nabil Pasha sat upright among the palms with a dagger in his breast and a message pinned above his heart. Poirot did not touch the body. He stood very still, his small hands clasped behind his back, and looked. That was always his way. Other men rushed to examine, to prod, to exclaim. Poirot first allowed the scene to speak. Sir Miles Carmichael arrived within moments, white to the lips. "My God," he said, "this is ruin." "It is certainly murder," said Poirot. "Ruin may follow, but let us keep the words in their correct order." A club servant had discovered the body and, to his credit, had not screamed. He stood now near the doorway, trembling, while 2 Egyptian policemen kept back the curious. The king, we were told, had already been escorted into a private chamber. The music had stopped. The laughter had died. Cairo, which had been glittering 5 minutes earlier, now held its breath. Sir Miles bent toward the paper. "The king has 24 hours," he read. Good God! They mean to frighten him into abdication. Or to frighten someone else into acting before he does, Poirot replied. You think this is not the work of the officers? I think, my friend, that a message pinned to a corpse is like a stage notice. It tells the audience what to believe. A sharp voice interrupted us. And what should we believe, monsieur? Colonel Rashid had come out onto the terrace. He was a tall, narrow man with a clipped moustache and eyes like black glass. His uniform was immaculate, his decorations arranged with mathematical severity. I disliked him at once, which is not always proof of guilt, but has often proved a useful beginning. Poirot bowed. We should believe, Colonel, only that Nabil Pasha expected to meet someone here at midnight. He expected to meet you. He expected also to bring me proof. Rashid's face did not change. Proof of treason? Perhaps. The colonel turned to Sir Miles. This affair must be handled by Egyptian authority. No foreign detective should interfere. Sir Miles stiffened. Nabil Pasha requested Monsieur Poirot's assistance before his death. And now he is dead. An argument, said Poirot mildly, that solves many inconveniences. For a second I thought Rashid might strike him. Instead, he looked down at the body. The dagger is from the royal collection, he said. That brought even Poirot's head round. You recognize it? Of course. It hung in a case in the king's retiring room, a ceremonial dagger, Persian workmanship, presented to His Majesty's grandfather. Sir Miles made a small sound. You mean it came from inside the palace apartments? I mean, said Rashid, that whoever killed Nabil Pasha wished us to know that the palace itself is compromised. Poirot's eyes rested on him. Or wished us to know that Colonel Rashid would say so. The colonel's hand tightened on his sword belt. At that moment another figure appeared behind him. Prince Kamal, the king's cousin. He was a handsome man of perhaps 35, with tired eyes, a gambler's mouth, and the elegant ruin of one who has spent too many nights proving himself alive. His dinner jacket was slightly rumpled, and there was a faint scent of brandy about him. Nabil, he said. No one answered. The prince came forward, saw the body and crossed himself, an odd little gesture, quickly suppressed. He was a fool, he murmured. An epitaph, said Poirot, with insufficient warmth. Prince Kamal looked at him. I do not pretend grief. In palaces, Monsieur Poirot, grief is usually delayed until one knows who benefits from it. And who benefits here? The prince smiled thinly. Everyone. That is why it is inconvenient. Before Poirot could question him further, Madame Samira Voss came out onto the terrace. I admit that even then, with murder before us, I noticed her. She had thrown a pale wrap over her silver gown, and the diamond clip in her dark hair caught the moonlight. But her face had altered. The mocking gaiety had gone. She looked older and more dangerous. She saw the dagger and stopped. Ah, she said softly. You recognize it too, madame? Poirot asked. I have seen it. Where? In the king's room, 2 nights ago. With whom? With His Majesty. There was a sharp silence. Colonel Rashid said coldly, That is enough. No, said Poirot. It is perhaps the first thing that is enough. Samira turned to him. The king was drunk. He was boasting of old weapons, old conquests, old blood. Men do that when they fear the new. And Nabil Pasha, he was there. So was the prince. So was Colonel Rashid. The colonel's face became stone. You forget yourself. No, Colonel, I remember too well. Poirot looked from one to the other. There was quarrelling. Samira laughed once. In Cairo now, monsieur, even compliments are quarrels. Sir Miles drew me aside. This is bad, Hastings, very bad. If the dagger truly came from the royal apartments, it links the murder directly to the king. The officers will use it. The palace faction will blame the officers. By morning there may be troops in the streets. Can nothing be done? He looked toward the shuttered windows behind which the king had vanished. That depends on whether His Majesty is capable of doing anything sensible before dawn. I had no answer to that. Poirot, meanwhile, had knelt beside the body. He examined the dead man's right hand, then the left cuff, the shoes, the chair, and finally the small table beside him. Upon it stood an untouched glass of lemonade, a silver cigarette case, and an ashtray containing 3 cigarette ends. Poirot picked up nothing, but he bent close. "Interesting," he murmured. "What is it?" I asked. "There are 3 cigarette ends, Hastings. Yet Nabil Pasha did not smoke." "How do you know?" "His fingers are unstained. His cigarette case is full. Also, earlier this evening, when nervous, he twisted a cigarette but did not light it. A smoker smokes when frightened. A non-smoker performs the gesture. Then someone waited with him. Or someone wished us to think so." He turned abruptly to the servant. "You found him?" "Yes, Effendi." "At what time?" "Midnight, and perhaps 5 minutes." "Did you see anyone leave the terrace?" The servant hesitated. Colonel Rashid stepped forward. "Answer." The man's eyes flicked from Rashid to the prince, then to Madame Samira. "I saw a shadow, Effendi." "A man or a woman?" "I do not know." "Tall, short?" "I do not know." Poirot's voice became very gentle. "But you know something." The servant swallowed. "I heard bells." "Bells?" "Small bells, Effendi, like those on a lady's anklet." Madame Samira went very still. Colonel Rashid turned sharply. "This is nonsense!" But Poirot was looking not at Samira's face, nor at her gown, but at the hem of her silver dress. There were no bells upon it. Then, from inside the club, came the sound of raised voices. A door slammed. An officer ran past the terrace entrance, pale and breathless. Sir Miles seized him by the arm. "What is it?" The officer looked at the body, then at us. "Troops have moved from Abbassia barracks," he said. "The radio station is guarded. The telegraph lines are unreliable." He swallowed. "Someone has begun." Poirot rose slowly. Behind us, beyond the Nile, Cairo's lights seemed suddenly less like stars than fuses burning toward powder. "Come, Hastings," he said. "We have now 2 mysteries. Who killed Nabil Pasha? And who required him to die before Egypt awakened?" He looked once more at the dead man. "And unless I am mistaken, the second question is the more dangerous. Chapter 3, The King's Room." It is an odd sensation to investigate a murder while a kingdom begins to collapse around one. In the ordinary course of things, there are policemen, servants, locked doors, muddy footprints, and the comforting belief that the world outside remains roughly as it was before. But that night in Cairo, every question seemed to have gunfire concealed beneath it. Men crossed rooms too quickly. Telephones rang and rang unanswered. Aides whispered in corners. Somewhere, beyond the palms and white walls, lorries full of soldiers were moving through the city. Sir Miles led us from the terrace to the private apartments reserved for King Farid at the club. 2 guards stood outside the door, young men in polished boots, who looked as if they had been dressed for ceremony and found themselves by accident in history. Inside, the king was raging. His Majesty stood beside a table on which a decanter had been overturned. Brandy seeped across papers, staining maps and telegrams the color of old blood. Prince Kamal lounged near the window, smoking. Colonel Rashid stood upright by the mantel. Madame Samira sat in a low chair, one silver shoe tapping softly against the carpet. The king turned as we entered. I will not be questioned by a Belgian. Poirot bowed. Majesty, I have no wish to question a king. I wish only to question a man who may soon have fewer friends than he believes. It was an appalling thing to say. I expected an explosion. Instead, King Farid stared at Poirot with a sudden, almost boyish uncertainty. Then he laughed. You have courage. No, Majesty, I have experience. It is less glamorous, but more useful. Sir Miles came forward. Your Majesty, the situation is serious. Troops are moving. Let them move, Farid cried. I am the king. Prince Kamal blew smoke toward the ceiling. For the moment. The king rounded on him. You would like that, wouldn't you? My dear Farid, I should like a drink, a passport, and a country less addicted to melodrama. Colonel Rashid said coldly, This is not the time for jokes. No, said the prince. It is the time for pretending we did not see it coming. The king seized a paper from the table and crushed it in his fist. Traitors, all of them, boys with mustaches and pamphlets. I should have had them arrested months ago. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You had the names, Majesty? The king hesitated. Nabil Pasha's death had frightened him more than any movement of troops. That I saw clearly. He was not cowardly exactly, but he had the royal vice of believing danger to be insolent. There was a list, he said at last, kept by Nabil Pasha, by several people, including Colonel Rashid. Rashid inclined his head. Naturally. Military intelligence must know such matters. And the dagger, said Poirot. The dagger with which Nabil Pasha was killed. It came from this room. The king looked at the empty case upon the wall. Red velvet showed where a weapon had hung. Beneath it was a small brass plate. A gift, he said, from Persia. When did you last see it? 2 nights ago. With Madame Samira? The king glanced toward her. For the first time his expression softened. Yes. Samira did not look at him. Poirot approached the display case. The glass door was shut. Locked? Always, said Rashid. Who has the key? The king's valet, His Majesty, Nabil Pasha, myself. Prince Kamal coughed delicately. And me, once upon a time, when Farid believed I could be trusted with sharp objects. The king scowled. You lost that privilege after Alexandria. A misunderstanding involving a racing debt and a Greek widow. Hardly treason. Poirot examined the case without touching it. No splintered wood. No forced lock. The dagger was taken by a key, or by someone to whom the locked case offered no obstacle. Meaning? Asked Sir Miles. Meaning that the theft of the dagger was not performed in haste? The king strode toward him. You think I killed Nabil? I think, Majesty, that a murderer wished your enemies to think it possible. Absurd. On the contrary, it is intelligent. A royal dagger in a dead minister's breast, a threat pinned to him, troops moving in the night. This is not merely murder. It is theatre with artillery. Samira spoke suddenly. Nabil was going to betray someone. All eyes turned to her. Poirot said gently, Madame? She sat very still. He was frightened tonight. Not of the officers, of the palace. Rashid gave a short laugh. You know this because he confided in you? No, because frightened men do not boast. Guilty men do. Her eyes moved to the king. Nabil boasted 3 days ago that he held the safety of the throne in his hands. What did he mean? I asked. He said there was a name on the officers' list that would break His Majesty's heart. The room froze. The king's face changed. What name? Samira's voice was low. He did not say. Prince Kamal flicked ash into a silver tray. How inconvenient of him. Dead men should be more explicit. Poirot turned sharply. Prince Kamal, where were you at midnight? At a baccarat table, losing money with admirable consistency. With witnesses? Several. Unfortunately for my reputation, all sober enough to remember. Colonel Rashid. At the telephone, attempting to reach the War Ministry. Witnesses? My adjutant. A loyal man? I prefer them so. Madame Samira? She smiled faintly. In the powder room. With witnesses? Women always have witnesses. It is one of the inconveniences of our sex. Poirot's moustache twitched. And His Majesty? The king threw back his head. I was here. Alone? No, said Samira before he could answer. He was not alone. The king stared at her. She rose. I was with His Majesty from 20 minutes to 12, until a quarter past. Colonel Rashid's brows drew together. That is untrue. You just said... I know what I said. The king's face darkened. Samira. She did not look at him. Forgive me, Majesty, you wished it hidden. Now it cannot be. I understood then. The king, who could face mutiny with bluster, flushed like a schoolboy at the exposure of a private assignation. Poirot looked from Samira to the king. Then neither of you could have killed Nabil Pasha at midnight. That, said Rashid, depends whether Madame is telling the truth. She is, said the king angrily. How fortunate, murmured Prince Kamal, that love still serves some public purpose. There came a crack from outside, not loud, but unmistakable. A rifle shot, then another. The room held its breath. Sir Miles went to the window and pulled back the curtain. In the distance, toward the city centre, a faint reddish glow had appeared above the rooftops. The radio building, Rashid said. The king turned on him. Send troops. Which troops, Majesty? Rashid asked quietly. There was the brutal question. For all the silk, gold, and ceremony in that room, power had already slipped elsewhere. One could feel it. The king felt it too. His lips parted, but no command came. Poirot moved to the table and lifted with his handkerchief a scrap of damp paper from the edge of the spilled brandy. Mon Dieu, he murmured. What is it? I asked. He smoothed it carefully. Most of the writing had dissolved, but several words remained. Not Farid, before dawn. Train. Child. Sir Miles stared. Child? The king snatched the paper and read it. His face went grey. Where did this come from? From your table, Majesty. I have never seen it before. Poirot watched him closely. Then someone placed it here. At that instant the door opened, and a young secretary stumbled in, his spectacles crooked, his hair wild. Majesty, the palace telephones are cut. Armoured cars have been seen near Abdin. The officers demand the dismissal of the government. And their leader? Demanded Rashid. The secretary swallowed. Captain Hassan el-Masri has been named among them. Nabil Pasha's accusation had been true after all. The king gripped the back of a chair. Poirot turned to Sir Miles. We must speak to Captain Hassan. Sir Miles laughed harshly. He is in revolt. Precisely. If Nabil Pasha was killed to provoke the king into an error, then Captain Hassan may be the only man alive who knows why. Prince Kamal looked amused. You propose to walk into a coup and request an interview? Poirot adjusted his cuffs. No, monsieur. I propose to walk into a murder inquiry. It is the coup that has chosen to happen in the way. He turned toward the door. Come, Hastings. I followed him, though I confess that at that moment I would have preferred almost any other destination on earth. Behind us, the King of Egypt stood beneath an empty dagger case, listening to the first shots of his own downfall. Chapter 4. The Officer Who Would Not Bow. We left the automobile club by a side entrance just before 1 in the morning. The ordinary streets of Cairo, which by day were a roaring confusion of donkey carts, motor cars, vendors, Europeans in linen suits, Egyptians in galabeas, and boys darting everywhere like swallows, had changed. They had not emptied. That would have been less alarming. Instead, people had gathered in little knots beneath balconies and awnings, speaking in low, urgent voices. Every face turned at the sound of an engine. Every engine seemed to carry either salvation or disaster. Sir Miles came with us, despite Colonel Rashid's objections. The colonel himself had vanished, supposedly to re-establish contact with loyal units, though Poirot made no comment upon this beyond a soft little click of the tongue. Prince Kamal remained with the king. Madame Samira had also remained, which surprised me. I had expected her to disappear at the first useful moment, as beautiful women in dangerous situations often do, usually with someone else's passport. Our car was driven by a young Egyptian attached to the Residency, a neat, silent fellow named Youssef, whose expression suggested that he had already decided the monarchy was finished, and was merely too polite to mention it. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To find Captain Hassan el-Masri," said Poirot. "In the middle of a military rising?" "Yes. That may prove difficult." "It is why we go now, Hastings. In a revolution, later is often another name for never." Sir Miles leaned forward. "The free officers, if that is what they are calling themselves, will have men at the radio station, the war ministry, the main barracks, and the bridges. Hassan is likely at one of those points." "And you believe he will talk to us?" "I believe," said Poirot, "that a man who is attempting to overthrow a king may still object to being accused of murder." We drove on. Near Ataba Square, we encountered our first roadblock. A lorry stood across the street, and beside it were 6 soldiers with rifles. They were young, most of them scarcely older than boys, but their nervousness made them more dangerous rather than less. One shouted for us to stop. Youssef obeyed at once. Sir Miles lowered the window. "British Residency," he said. The soldier stared at him. "No passage." "My good man." "No passage." Poirot leaned across him. "We seek Captain Hassan el-Masri." The soldier's eyes changed. "You know the captain?" "I know that he is perhaps innocent of murder." That was not, I thought, the most diplomatic password. But revolutions have their own logic. The soldier hesitated, then spoke rapidly to another man who disappeared behind the lorry. We waited. From somewhere not far away came the clatter of boots and the heavy cough of a truck engine. A woman called from an upper window. No one answered her. Cairo seemed to have become a stage on which everyone had forgotten his lines, but remembered the ending must be violent. At last, the second soldier returned. "You come," he said. We were escorted past the lorry and into a government building whose identity I never clearly learned. It had high ceilings, dusty corridors, and the sour smell common to offices in hot countries where ink, sweat, and old paper have entered into permanent alliance. Captain Hassan el-Masri stood in a room at the rear, bending over a map with 2 other officers. He had removed his dress jacket and now wore a plain khaki tunic. Without the glitter of the club, he looked older and harder. He raised his eyes as we entered. "Monsieur Poirot," he said. "So," said Poirot, "Cairo is indeed well informed." Hassan gave the ghost of a smile. Cairo always knows when a foreigner arrives to solve what Egyptians already understand. Sir Miles stiffened. "Captain, you are engaged in open rebellion." "No," said Hassan, "we are engaged in ending a long insult." "That," I said sharply, "is a matter for politicians." He looked at me with calm contempt. "Then you have not lived under our politicians." Poirot lifted a hand. "Captain, I did not come to debate Egypt. I came to ask whether you murdered Nabil Pasha." One of the officers swore. Hassan did not move. "No." "You expected the question?" "I expected the palace to throw a corpse at us before dawn." "Why?" "Because the palace is rotten, and rot defends itself by stinking more loudly than anything else." Sir Miles said, "Careful, Captain." Hassan ignored him. Nabil Pasha was to have arrested 37 officers tonight, not merely questioned, arrested, beaten, perhaps hanged after a trial arranged over coffee, but the list he had was incomplete. "Incomplete?" asked Poirot. "Yes, he had names. He did not have the center." "The leader?" Hassan's mouth tightened. "Perhaps." Poirot watched him. "You speak as if the leader were not yourself." The silence was answer enough. Sir Miles stared. "Good God! Then who?" Hassan said nothing. Poirot reached into his pocket and took out the damp scrap from the king's room, now wrapped carefully in a handkerchief. "Do these words mean anything to you?" "Not Farid, before dawn, train, child." For the first time, Hassan lost color. "Where did you find that?" "In the king's private room." Hassan turned away sharply. The other officers exchanged glances. Poirot's voice was soft. "Captain, if you do not tell me the truth, a murder may become a massacre." Hassan faced him again. "There is a child." "Whose child?" He hesitated. Poirot said, "The king's." "No." The reply came too quickly. "Prince Kamal's?" I suggested. Hassan's eyes flicked toward me, and I knew I had struck somewhere near the mark. Poirot nodded almost imperceptibly. "A child connected with Prince Kamal, and a train before dawn." Hassan spoke through clenched teeth. "The prince has a son." Sir Miles gave an exclamation. "That is impossible. Kamal has no legitimate children." "I did not say legitimate." The pieces shifted in my mind, without yet forming a picture. Hassan continued. "Years ago, before he became a useful ornament of the palace, Prince Kamal married secretly. A village girl from the Delta. Religious ceremony only. No registration, no permission. When the palace learned of it, the woman vanished from public view. She bore a son." "And this son," asked Poirot, "is being taken tonight by train to Alexandria. From there, perhaps abroad. Perhaps somewhere no one asks questions." Sir Miles frowned. "Why would that matter now?" "Because," said Hassan, "there are men in the army who would not support the coup if they believed its consequence would be chaos. A royal child, however obscure, however inconvenient, could be used. Not as king, perhaps, as a symbol, a regency, a compromise, a way to remove Farid without handing Egypt entirely to the officers." "And Nabil knew?" "Nabil knew part of it. He intended to sell the knowledge to whichever side paid more." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then the words 'not Farid' mean that the true target tonight is not the king." Hassan said nothing. "Who wrote this message?" Poirot asked. "I do not know." "But you have seen the writing?" Again the slight hesitation. "Yes." "Whose?" Before he could answer, the door opened and a soldier entered hurriedly. He saluted. "Captain, Abdin Palace is surrounded. The king's guard will not resist. Colonel Rashid requests direct negotiation." "Rashid?" said Sir Miles. Hassan's expression darkened. "He requests nothing, he bargains." "With whom?" asked Poirot. "With whoever is winning." Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, we return to the king." I confess I was relieved. A government building held by rebellious officers is not a place where one wishes to overstay one's welcome. Hassan stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot. Yes? If you are going back to the palace, remember this. Nabil Pasha did not fear me. He feared the person who could move between all rooms and belong to none. A servant? I asked. Hassan looked past me. No, a woman. Poirot's face betrayed nothing. Madame Samira? Hassan's jaw tightened. She wears bells sometimes. Small silver bells at the ankle. Men hear them in their dreams and forget their duties. The servant's words returned to me. Small bells, like those on a lady's anklet. So she killed him, I said. Hassan's mouth twisted. I said she could move. I did not say she killed. Poirot gave him a sharp little bow. You have learned, Captain, the first lesson of detection. Possibility is not proof. We left under escort. As we reached the street, the first pale suggestion of dawn had begun to thin the eastern sky. Cairo did not sleep. It waited. On the drive back, Sir Miles sat grim and silent. I, however, could not contain myself. Poirot, do you believe Hassan? I believe he has lied. About the child? No. About his own place in the matter. Then he is the leader? Perhaps. Or perhaps he protects the leader. And Samira? Poirot looked out at the streets where soldiers now stood at corners and civilians watched from doorways. Madame Samira is like Cairo tonight, Hastings. Everyone thinks they know what she is. No one asks what she wants. At the palace gates, we found armored cars. The revolution had arrived before us. Chapter 5. The Palace Without a King. At the gates of Abdin Palace, history had taken off its gloves. The great ironwork entrance, which only hours earlier would have admitted motor cars, ministers, and women in diamonds, was now blocked by an armored car with its gun pointed not at an enemy army, but at the home of its own sovereign. Soldiers stood in 2 files beneath the lamps. Some looked grim, others merely frightened. A boy with a rifle too large for him glanced at our motor car and then quickly away, as if ashamed to be seen assisting in the death of a dynasty. Sir Miles leaned from the window. British Residency, we are expected. The lieutenant at the gate looked doubtful. By whom? It was a fair question. In such moments, authority becomes a hat passed from head to head. Poirot opened the door and descended before Sir Miles could reply. By the truth, mon lieutenant, he said, it is always inconvenient, but it has precedence. The young officer blinked. He had clearly never received such an order. Perhaps because of that he let us through. Inside the palace, confusion reigned in the place of monarchy. Servants carried trunks down corridors. Aides hurried with papers. Officers argued in corners. Somewhere a woman was weeping with the high, exhausted sob of someone who had wept for hours and found no advantage in it. The chandeliers blazed over all this panic, giving the scene a horrible gaiety. Colonel Rashid met us at the foot of a marble staircase. His face was composed, too composed. Monsieur Poirot, you return from your excursion among traitors? From my excursion among men with guns, said Poirot. I find the distinction becomes less precise as dawn approaches. Rashid ignored this. His Majesty is in council. He cannot be disturbed. Then we shall disturb him. You forget where you are. No, Colonel. I remember exactly. I am in a palace where a man has been murdered with a royal dagger, where a hidden child may be used to alter a nation's future, and where everyone who says His Majesty is thinking of himself. Rashid's nostrils flared. Sir Miles stepped in quickly. Colonel, enough. Let him see the king. For a moment I thought Rashid would refuse. Then a door opened above us, and Prince Kamal descended the staircase, pale, unshaven, and strangely stripped of his usual languor. Let him come, he said. Farid is past being protected from facts. Rashid gave him a cold look. And you, Highness? Are you past being protected? Kamal stopped. It was only a second, but Poirot saw it. We were taken to a long reception room overlooking the gardens. The shutters were half closed, though pale dawn already pressed at their edges. King Farid stood near a writing desk. The arrogance had not left him, but fatigue had cracked it. He looked less like a monarch than a young man who had stayed too long at a party and found the bill placed in his hand. Madame Samira stood by the window. She had changed neither gown nor expression, yet something in her seemed altered. The glitter had gone inward. She looked not decorative now, but watchful. "You have been to Hassan," said the king. "Yes, Majesty," said Poirot. "Then you know he is a traitor. I know he is not a fool." The king gave a bitter laugh. "An improvement on most of my court." Poirot looked at him steadily. "Majesty, there is a child." The effect was extraordinary. The king stared blankly. Prince Kamal made a low sound, almost like a man struck in the stomach. Colonel Rashid, who had entered silently behind us, did not move. Samira closed her eyes. The king turned slowly toward his cousin. "Kamal?" The prince sank into a chair. "I meant to tell you." "That is always the opening sentence of a coward," said the king. Kamal covered his face with one hand. "He is my son. His name is Karim. His mother is dead." "And tonight?" asked Poirot. Kamal looked up. "Nabil discovered him. Not everything, but enough. He came to me yesterday and offered silence in exchange for money." "You refused?" "I had little to offer that Nabil did not already possess." "Do not be modest," said Rashid. "You had blood." Kamal stood suddenly. "You snake." Rashid's hand went to his pistol. Poirot's voice cut across them. "The child is being moved before dawn by train to Alexandria. Who arranged it?" No one answered. Poirot turned to Samira. "Madame?" Her face remained calm, but I saw one hand tighten upon the curtain. "Yes," she said. The king stared at her. "You?" "I arranged protection." "For whom?" demanded Sir Miles. "For the boy." Kamal whispered, "Where is he?" Samira looked at him with sudden contempt. "Only now you ask, like a father?" The prince flinched. Poirot moved a step closer. "Madame, Nabil Pasha was killed by someone wearing small bells. At least, so the servant believes. Captain Hassan tells us you sometimes wear such bells." "I do." "Did you wear them tonight?" "No." "Where are they?" She smiled faintly. "You wish to search my ankles, Monsieur Poirot?" Despite everything, I felt myself blush. Samira lifted the hem of her silver gown an inch. Her ankles were bare except for silk stockings and silver shoes. "No bells," I said. "No," said Poirot. "And yet bells were heard." Rashid gave a sharp laugh. "Enough of this. The woman admits she arranged the movement of the child. Nabil knew. Nabil died. She had motive and opportunity." "Did she?" asked Poirot. "She was absent from the salon." "She says she was with the king." Rashid turned to Farid. "Majesty, in mercy to your dignity, I did not press the matter earlier, but now I must. Was Madame Samira truly with you from 20 minutes to midnight until 1:15? The king's face darkened. He looked at Samira. Something passed between them. Not romance, I think, but a final recognition that lies had become more expensive than truth. "No," he said. I started. Samira remained perfectly still. "She came here at 20 minutes to 12, the king continued. "She left almost at once." "Farid," she said softly. "No." I will not be made a fool in my last hours." His voice rose. She was gone until after midnight. Colonel Rashid's smile was thin. "There is your murderess." But Poirot was watching the king. "Majesty, why did you lie for her?" The king's anger collapsed into something uglier. "Because I wished the room to believe she loved me." There was a silence more painful than any accusation. Samira did not defend herself. That, more than anything, troubled me. Poirot turned to her. "Where were you?" She said nothing. "Madame, if you do not answer, the story will be written without you." At that, she laughed bitterly. "It always is." Then she crossed to a small lacquered cabinet, opened it, and removed a velvet pouch. From it she took a silver anklet set with tiny bells. Rashid stepped forward triumphantly. Poirot raised a hand. "Permit me." He took the anklet with his handkerchief and shook it gently. No sound came. The little bells had been packed with wax. Poirot's eyes shone. "Ah," Rashid frowned. "What trick is this?" "No trick. An explanation." He held the anklet toward the light. "These bells cannot ring, not tonight. Someone wished Madame Samira to be associated with bells, but forgot that she had silenced them." Samira looked at him sharply. "You knew?" "I suspected. A singer moving through palace corridors does not advertise her passage unless she wishes to be noticed. You wished not to be noticed." "Then who did the servant hear?" I asked. Poirot looked at Colonel Rashid. "The person who borrowed the idea of Madame's bells." Rashid's face did not change. Poirot continued. "There are military decorations, are there not, Colonel, which contain small chains, spurs, sword knots, ceremonial attachments? A man crossing marble in haste may produce a sound which a frightened servant, thinking of Madame Samira, translates into bells." "Nonsense." "Is it? You knew of the dagger. You had a key. You knew of the list. You knew Nabil was bargaining. You knew that if the child disappeared, Prince Kamal's value disappeared with him. And you knew that if Madame Samira were blamed, the king would be personally humiliated at the precise moment he required dignity." The colonel's hand moved. Hassan el-Masri's voice came from the doorway. "Do not." He stood there with two officers behind him, pistol drawn. Rashid froze. The king looked from one armed man to the other and understood, perhaps for the first time, that both claimed to serve Egypt, and neither required his permission. Poirot, however, did not look triumphant. "No," he said quietly. "Colonel Rashid is guilty of much, but he did not kill Nabil Pasha." Everyone turned. Rashid stared. Poirot faced the room. "The murderer is here, and it is time the little comedy of loyalty came to its end." Outside in the palace courtyard, an engine started. Somewhere beyond the gates, the first call to prayer rose over Cairo, beautiful and indifferent. Dawn had come. Chapter 6. The Abdication. The call to prayer seemed to hang above the palace like a judgment. No one moved. Even Colonel Rashid, whose hand still hovered near his pistol, appeared held in place by Poirot's words. The king stood beneath the gilt ceiling, pale and furious. Prince Kamal leaned against the back of a chair, as though his bones had suddenly deserted him. Madame Samira watched Poirot with eyes that had lost all coquetry. Captain Hassan el-Masri remained in the doorway, his pistol lowered but ready. I felt absurdly that I should speak. I did not. Poirot had that effect upon a room. When he chose silence, others found it difficult to fill. At last King Farid said hoarsely, "Who killed Nabil?" Poirot turned to him. "Majesty, before I answer, permit me to remove one illusion. Nabil Pasha was not murdered because he knew of the officers rising. Half Cairo knew of the officer's rising. He was not murdered because he held a list of names. Lists in this palace multiply like flies. No. Nabil Pasha was murdered because he discovered that one person wished to profit from the fall of the king and the victory of the officers alike. Colonel Rashid gave a harsh laugh. That describes every man in this room. Not every man, said Poirot. One person. He turned suddenly to Prince Kamal. The prince closed his eyes. No, whispered the king. Kamal opened them again. He looked no longer ironic, no longer charming. He looked merely tired. Poirot said, Your Highness, when Nabil Pasha came to you yesterday, he did not blackmail you over the existence of your son. That was already known to several people. He blackmailed you because he had discovered where the child was being kept. Kamal said nothing. Madame Samira drew in a sharp breath. Poirot continued. You loved the boy, perhaps, but you loved still more the idea of what he could make you. If King Farid fell, and if the officers feared a republic too sudden for Egypt, a compromise might be made. A royal child, a regency, a cousin of the king standing loyally beside him. You, monsieur, would become indispensable. The king stared at Kamal as though at a stranger. You would use a child? Kamal's mouth twisted. You used a throne. The words struck harder than a blow. Hassan spoke from the doorway. So Nabil learned of the plan. Yes, said Poirot, but he did not intend to reveal it to the king. Nabil Pasha was too practical for that. He intended to sell it to the highest bidder, Prince Kamal, Colonel Rashid, the officers, perhaps even Sir Miles if desperation improved the price. Sir Miles flushed, but said nothing. Kamal gave a dry little laugh. Nabil always did understand exchange. Poirot's eyes hardened. You arranged to meet him on the terrace at midnight. He believed you would pay. Instead, you killed him. No, said Kamal. It was very quiet, almost bored. The king took a step toward him. Deny it properly. Kamal looked at him. Why? You never listened when denial might have mattered. Poirot lifted the folded paper from the table. The threatening message found pinned to Nabil's breast. The message was clever. The king has 24 hours. It made the murder appear part of the coup. It placed pressure upon His Majesty. It gave Colonel Rashid room to blame the officers. It gave the officers reason to suspect the palace. Above all, it created confusion in which a child might vanish. I frowned. But the dagger? From the royal case? Ah, Hastings, the dagger was necessary because it was too obvious. Colonel Rashid had access. The king had access. Nabil had access. Prince Kamal had access also, once upon a time, as he himself told us, before Alexandria. He wished us to remember that as a joke. It was not a joke. It was an alibi of familiarity. He knew the key, the case, the habits of the room. Rashid said coldly, And the bells? Poirot turned to him. You, Colonel, were nearly made murderer by accident. You crossed the terrace in your ceremonial sword belt shortly after the killing. The servant, frightened and already thinking of Madame Samira, heard the faint clink of metal and converted it into bells. That is why his description was vague. He did not see bells. He heard guilt passing and gave it the wrong name. Rashid's face darkened, but he did not contradict him. Then Madame Samira? Asked Sir Miles. She was saving the child, said Poirot. Samira lowered her eyes. Poirot's voice became gentler. She went, not to murder Nabil, but to arrange a change of route. She knew Prince Kamal wanted the boy moved by train to Alexandria. She feared that once aboard, he would become a pawn, perhaps for the prince, perhaps for the officers, perhaps for some foreign embassy with a taste for influence. So she altered the plan. Kamal turned on her. "Where is he?" For the first time, Samira's face showed open hatred. "Safe from you." "Where?" "With people who remember his mother." Kamal lunged toward her, but Hassan's pistol came up. "Enough," said the captain. Poirot stepped between them with perfect calm, though I confess my own heart was hammering. "Your Highness, after killing Nabil, you returned here. But something had gone wrong. You had intended to retrieve from Nabil the note concerning the train and the child. Instead, brandy was spilled, the paper was damaged, and only fragments remained. You placed those fragments on the king's table to make the plot appear to come from outside. But ink, like memory, sometimes leaves enough." Kamal smiled faintly. "You have no proof." Poirot sighed. "Always at the end, there is someone who says this. It has become tedious." He took from his pocket a small object wrapped in linen. "When I examined Nabil Pasha's left cuff, I found a thread caught in the button. Dark blue silk, with a trace of gold. Not from Colonel Rashid's black uniform. Not from Madame's silver gown. Not from the king's evening coat." He looked at Kamal. "From your waistcoat, monsieur. The one you wore at the club. Blue silk brocade with gold embroidery." Kamal glanced down. His hand moved involuntarily to his waistcoat. It was enough. Poirot pressed on. "And there is more. When you leaned over Nabil to withdraw the dagger from beneath his hand, yes, he struggled for an instant, you cut yourself upon the jeweled hilt, not deeply, the right thumb. You kept it hidden all morning in your fist, or beneath a cigarette." All eyes went to the prince's hand. Slowly, almost gracefully, Kamal opened it. A neat strip of blood-stained linen was wound around his thumb. The king made a sound of disgust. Kamal looked at him with sudden venom. "Do not look at me like that. You would have ruined us all. You were handed a country and mistook it for an appetite." "And you mistook a child for a throne," said Poirot. That silenced him. For a moment I thought Kamal might weep. Instead he laughed, softly and without humour. "Yes, perhaps. But tell me, Monsieur Poirot, what is one dead parasite beside what is happening outside? You solve a murder in a burning house and expect applause for naming the spark." Poirot's face was grave. "No, monsieur, I expect no applause, but murder remains murder, even when history shouts louder." Captain Hassan nodded to his men. They moved forward and took Prince Kamal by the arms. He did not resist. The king watched him go. When the door had closed, Farid seemed suddenly smaller. The silk sash, the diamonds, the dark hair brushed back from his forehead. None of it made him royal now. It made him a young man in costume. Hassan stepped into the room. "Majesty, the army requires your abdication. There must be no bloodshed." The king laughed once. "Requires?" "Yes. And if I refuse?" Hassan's face did not change. "Then men will die for a crown they do not respect." The words were brutal. They were also true. Sir Miles moved uneasily. "Your Majesty, London will advise." "London?" Farid turned on him with sudden fire. "London has advised Egypt for long enough." Sir Miles fell silent. The king went to the window and opened the shutters. Dawn had spread across Cairo. The palace gardens were washed in pale gold. Beyond the gates waited soldiers, clerks, servants, opportunists, patriots, cowards, and the merely curious, the entire machinery by which a nation changes hands. For a long moment Farid stood there. Then he said very quietly, "Bring me the paper." No one misunderstood him. An hour later, in a chamber stripped of ceremony, the abdication was written. Not exactly as the officers wished it. Not exactly as the palace wished it. That is the way of such documents. They are born in panic and dressed afterward in legality. King Farid signed with a hand that shook only once. When it was done, he put down the pen and looked at Poirot. "You have saved nothing, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot bowed. "I have saved a child, Majesty, and perhaps the truth of one death." The king smiled bitterly. "Small victories. They are the only kind permitted to human beings." By noon, the city had changed its voice. Crowds filled the streets. Some cheered, some watched in silence. Portraits were removed. Flags appeared. Men who had bowed yesterday discovered that their backs had always been straight. Such transformations are common in revolutions and seldom attractive. From the balcony of the Residency, I saw King Farid's motorcar depart under guard, driving toward the railway station and, beyond that, exile. He did not look back. Madame Samira left the palace before sunset. She wore no diamonds and no bells. Poirot spoke with her briefly in the garden. "You will not tell where the boy is?" he asked. "No." "The officers will search." "They may. Egypt is large when poor people choose silence." Poirot inclined his head. "And you, madame?" She looked toward the city. "I shall sing somewhere else." "For kings?" "No. I have had enough of men who require music while others starve." She turned to go, then paused. "Monsieur Poirot, did Prince Kamal love his son?" Poirot considered this. "He loved what the child made possible. That is a poor cousin to love, but it sometimes wears the same coat." She nodded once and walked away. That evening, Poirot and I sat upon the hotel terrace overlooking the Nile. Cairo was noisy below us, jubilant and afraid in equal measure. The old order had fallen, but the new one, I suspected, had already begun collecting its own lies. I said as much to Poirot. He nodded sadly. "Oui, Hastings. The tragedy of power is that it changes hands more often than habits." "You sound pessimistic." "I am Belgian," he replied. "It is not pessimism. It is experience." For a while we said nothing. Then I asked, "Was King Farid a bad king?" Poirot looked out across the darkening river. "He was a foolish king. Sometimes history is more severe with foolishness than with wickedness." "And the coup?" Poirot sighed. "My friend, I am a detective, not a prophet. I know only this. When a nation has been treated as the possession of a few, sooner or later the many come to reclaim it. But when they come with guns, justice and revenge arrive in the same motor car." Below us, a crowd began singing in the street. Poirot listened, his head slightly tilted. "Still," he said softly, "tonight they sing." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, Hastings, they must govern." He rose, brushed an invisible speck of Cairo dust from his sleeve, and went inside. I remained a little longer by the Nile, thinking of a dead courtier, a hidden child, a singer without bells, and a young king travelling toward exile while his country woke behind him. It seemed to me then that Poirot had been right. Murder had been only the bell. The catastrophe was history itself. Epilogue, the real fall of King Farouk. The story you have just heard is fictional, but it is inspired by one of the decisive political ruptures of the modern Middle East, the Egyptian Revolution of 1952. The real King Farouk I of Egypt was not overthrown in the 1930s, but in July 1952. By then, his monarchy had become deeply unpopular. Farouk's reign was associated, fairly or unfairly, with corruption, court extravagance, political instability, British influence, and the humiliation of Egypt's defeat in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The mood of the country had hardened against him, especially within the army. The coup was carried out by the Free Officers movement, a group of Egyptian army officers associated above all with Gamal Abdel Nasser and General Mohammed Naguib. On July 23, 1952, the free officers seized control in Cairo. Their initial public face was Naguib, a respected senior officer, but Nasser soon emerged as the dominant force behind the revolution. Farouk's fall was swift. After troops loyal to the free officers surrounded the royal palace at Alexandria, the king was forced to abdicate on 26 July 1952 in favor of his infant son, Fuad II. That gesture preserved the appearance of monarchy for a short time, but real power had already passed to the military revolutionaries. Farouk then left Egypt aboard the royal yacht El Mahrousa, sailing into exile in Italy. The image of the once glittering king departing by yacht became one of the defining symbols of the end of Egypt's old order. The monarchy itself did not last much longer. In 1953, Egypt was declared a republic, bringing an end to the Muhammad Ali dynasty, which had ruled Egypt since the early 19th century. The revolution also marked the beginning of a new political era, nationalist, anti-imperial, military-led, and increasingly shaped by Nasser's vision of Arab nationalism. In our fictional version, the events have been moved earlier, so that Poirot and Hastings can plausibly be present. King Farid is not King Farouk, Captain Hassan is not Nasser or Naguib, and the murder plot is invented. But the atmosphere behind the story, the palace luxury, the army's anger, the resentment of foreign influence, the sense that a young king had lost control of his country, is drawn from the real crisis that ended royal Egypt. The real fall of Farouk was not a drawing-room mystery, it was a revolution. But like many revolutions, it contained all the ingredients of a detective story. Rumors, secret officers, hidden loyalties, frightened courtiers, midnight decisions, and the terrible moment when everyone inside the palace realizes that power has already moved outside the gates. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of The Last King of Cairo. This was a case in which murder was only the bell. The catastrophe was history itself. Our detective saw through it because a message pinned to a dead man is like a stage notice. It tells the audience what to believe, not what happened. The dagger from the royal collection, the threatening note in French, the confusion of blame between soldiers and courtiers, all of it was theater, designed to make a private killing look like a revolutionary act. But a thread of blue silk caught on a dead man's cuff button, and a small cut on a thumb hidden beneath a cigarette told the true story. The killer was not a patriot or a soldier, but a man whose tired elegance concealed an ambition that required a throne, and who believed that a murder committed during a revolution would be lost in the noise. It was not lost. Our detective does not permit noise to swallow the truth, even when history shouts louder. What lingers is the real upheaval beneath the fiction. The Egyptian Revolution of 1952 ended one of the most colorful and troubled monarchies of the 20th century. King Farouk I, on whom our fictional King Farid is loosely inspired, was overthrown on July 23, 1952, by the Free Officers Movement, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser and General Mohammed Naguib. Farouk's reign had become synonymous with court extravagance, corruption, and the humiliation of Egypt's defeat in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. After troops surrounded the royal palace at Alexandria, the king was forced to abdicate on 26 July in favor of his infant son, Fuad II, and sailed into exile aboard the royal yacht El Mahrousa, an image that became one of the defining symbols of the old order's end. The monarchy was abolished the following year, and Egypt was declared a republic. Our story moves these events earlier so that a celebrated detective can be present, and the murder plot is entirely invented. But the atmosphere of a glittering court collapsing under the weight of its own excess, the anger of young officers, and the terrible moment when everyone inside the palace realizes the gates have already changed hands, is drawn from the real crisis that ended royal Egypt. if this kind of mystery stayed with you. The ones set in perfumed cities where the palace gleams while the streets darken, where a murder on a moonlit terrace is only the overture to a revolution. And the most dangerous person is not the man with the dagger, but the quiet captain who asks for an abdication as calmly as he might ask for a glass of water. Tell us in the comments what you make of the detective's final conversation on the hotel terrace, and whether you think a country can change its rulers without also changing its habits. If you love losing yourself in these long-form mysteries, don't let commercial breaks ruin the suspense. For the cost of a single coffee, just $2.99 a month, our Patreon members enjoy every episode completely ad-free, along with early access to new cases. Click the Patreon link in the description to claim your seat by the fireside tonight. For now, thank you again for staying with us to the last line. Until the next case, be wary of champagne in palaces where the officers no longer salute. Never trust a message pinned to a dead man's breast. And remember, the tragedy of power is not that it corrupts. It is that it changes hands more often than habits.